Cybernaut here. It's linked right in. Okay, so I'm going to talk about routers. And you might wonder why, my name is Bryan, why routers are interesting. Usually they're this kind of box that's sitting, as we have here in the back. And they're just a piece of the infrastructure that you don't want to see. Like a router is usually successful when you don't even know it's there. But I think they're super interesting. I think they're the skin of the internet. And if the internet is this infrastructure we're in, usually you think of the control of it and like the core components being these fiber cables or these data centers that are centrally owned and managed. But really, if you look at the entire topology of the internet, most of the devices are either your devices, your laptops, or your router at home. There's many, many more. There's hundreds of millions of routers, and there's only a few of these central routers. So they're interdependent. You can't really say one's more important than the other, but the router is where we have the most control, and I think they're sadly neglected. They're not being used to progressively push forward the technology of the internet, build a better system, and they don't help us right now host our own things or experiment with new systems like an open library. So if you want to build an open library, you need a network that will host it and that will allow you to do what you want to do, allow you to share information that you want to share it. And routers aren't quite there yet. So recently my philosophy of technology has been very inspired by Ivan Illich and the idea of convivial technology. So I want to build convivial routers to build networks that are sticky. I think like the correct technologies will stick and they'll stay in place. Things like the spoon and the bicycle are like very basic. On a human level, they just work with society regardless of how they're manufactured or who manufactures them. The technology themselves are very empowering. You can use them however you want. No one can tell you what you can and can't do with your bike, things like that. So I want to try to build the internet and routers that are more in that kind of vein of use. So one of the big problems with the internet right now, if you're trying to communicate with arbitrary other computers, is NAT, or network address translation, which is something your router almost certainly does in almost every house or office. There aren't enough IPv4 addresses. So the IPv4, the Internet Protocol version 4, is a system for numbering and allowing computers to connect to each other. It's old, very famously. There's not enough addresses anymore. So we need to upgrade to a new system called IPv6. And one of the side effects of there not being enough addresses is that we use a trick right now where your house will get one IP address and all of your devices and all of your guests, any servers you have, anything like that, they need to share that one address. They have to squeeze in. If you're a business, you can buy more addresses. So Google has as many addresses as they want. Every one of their servers gets an address. But if you're at the edge, you only get one address and you have to squeeze a lot of things behind it. So if someone else on the internet wants to connect directly to your phone or your laptop or a server under your desk, they don't know, their connecting computer can't really tell which one to connect to because they don't have unique addresses they're sharing. And there's a number of other difficulties. So you can't initiate connections into devices behind a regular router. So part of the upgrade to IPv6 is that there's enough addresses now, there's an abundance of addresses, so you can throw them away. Actually, almost an entire half of the entire address space is thrown away and given to your local address, so you can have as many devices on your local network as you had on the entire internet before with IPv4. So you can make a direct connection to any individual device. Modulo a little security, you might want to block certain kinds of connections. But this isn't, this is rolling out very slowly. There's not really a best case. Like you can buy, I think here we have some connectivity with IPv6, but it's not enabled right now. It's a little on the fence how the technology is being rolled out. And some people even want to just roll it out and implement it the same way that IPv4 had, where you just get one single address for your own home and you do network address translation again behind it. And I think that would be like a horrible mistake. There's this great opportunity to do IPv6. People just have to do it and start using it. And the more people are using it, the more the technology will be locked in. This is my IPv6 address right now on my laptop. And as a demonstration, I'm connected through a device I built, a router. Here is on a machine that's on the other side of the world I'm logged into, a Delhi down here. So here I can check my local addresses, and I have a couple IPv6 addresses. And this one right here is one, and it's live to the whole world, so I can connect to my local web server down here. And this is my laptop, is Ziggy. So anyone on the whole internet that's on IPv6 can connect to my laptop right now. So if I was, for instance, sharing my books with Calibra, anyone on the internet could directly connect and start looking at my books, which is something that would be possible but more difficult to do with IPv4. I would have had to spend a lot more time talking with the network people here to get a specific hole opened so that people could connect to my laptop. Okay. So I'm building a device called Router. There's one of them sitting right over here, which is a router that I think is like more progressive, and it's allows different kinds of use cases. It's similar to a device called the Freedom Box, which has gotten some attention on the internet recently by a crowd of people who are very against Facebook and Twitter and Google and cloud computing. They hate the idea of cloud computing, of other people owning the infrastructure and owning the network. And I'm also against people not having control over owning their infrastructure and owning the network, but I'm not as like anti, I guess I'm like more pro, like people should do their own thing and build their own things. And there was a couple of problems I had with the Freedom Box. They look like this. It's this extra device you buy, you plug it in, you have to plug it into your regular router, and then you have to configure your router a whole bunch if you want to be able to make connections into it, and that just doesn't make sense to me. I think it should be, the router should be the central device that does everything and has servers built into it. So with a Freedom Box, you can run your own social, or perhaps someday you'll be able to run your own social network, you'll be able to run your own web server, chat, all these things you can run off a device, and I think they should be combined. So to me, the Router device is a combination of a computer like the Freedom Box and your router, so it's just one thing you have. So if you're interested, or if you're bored and you have a laptop right now, you can try out the router I have. It's running on the SSID HAIP.router.is, and the password is HAIP.router.is, and the URL of it, accessible to the whole internet, is HAIP.router.is. So I have a couple of things running on it right now. There's like some file sharing if you want to download some music, a blog. I have a Calibra library, so you can browse my set of books that I have and just straight download them. This system's a little janky right now. To get Calibra running on a server like this, you have to export a directory of all your books and load them in. But hopefully we can build some software plugins to make that easier. And underneath the core of the system is a router firmware called OpenWRT, which has a web interface. You can go in and configure things. You can see how many people are logged in, for instance, right now. It looks like there's only 2 of us. You can see how much traffic is being used. And so you get like all of the usability of this existing system that a lot of people run. You can run this firmware, the OpenWRT firmware, runs on most routers at home. So if you just want to get IPv6 networking running and a couple other features like that, you can do it without like upgrading to a more powerful device like the router will be. Okay, so one other thing I have running on this router right now is a demonstration of what you can do when you control the network, when you control the gateway going out to the internet. You can do hacks like man-in-the-middle end hack. So this is a website called Open Library, which consolidates metadata from archive.org, and they have lots of free ebooks, but they don't have all the free ebooks. But even for books they don't have, you can search their database. It's a little slow. Huh? Do you know how to spell it? I'm spelling it wrong. I've got it here. Okay, so you could find a book like this. So there's many different editions of it. You'd select an edition that you want, or that you have in your own library. Often you end up with so many books you don't know how to find them, so this interface might be more convenient for looking at what books you have. And here I've inserted links on the side to search either in the HAIP library that we have, which doesn't have a copy of this particular book, or I can have a direct link to search on my version of the library, and I do have a copy of this book. So here, sort of like sometimes when you're in a library and you do a search, you'll find links to the library or the institution's sites, and here I have a personal library running on my router. So when I do a search on this website, I get a link to my personal copy of it automatically, and that's the kind of thing you can do if you control the network gateway. All right, another kind of interesting network thing you can do when you have like your own router running is participate in networks like Tor. So Tor is a kind of a complicated thing, like its own talk, but it's an overlay network. So it's a network that lives on top of the internet. Devices in the network are virtually connected over the internet instead of directly connected with cables and wires. And the intent of the network is to have completely anonymous transfer of information and connections between people. So your computer or laptop, if you're using the network, you connect into a node in the network, and then all of the information that travels to the end of your connection bounces around randomly. Almost every single connection you make goes through a different route, through a different set of computers. So as long as a couple of those computers along the way aren't run by the NSA or aren't being run by the Chinese government or whoever you don't like, or your parents or your brother or sister, then they don't know where you're coming from or where you're going. They're just every node in the network accepts connections from anyone without knowing who they are and passes the connection on to someone else, and they don't know who that someone else is. So the more people that are connected to the network, it kind of multiplies the amount of traffic that's used. Normally you would just connect from one server to another. This way you're bouncing through like 8 or 9 different servers. So there's kind of an amplification. There's 8 or 9 times as much traffic. So it isn't like a solution for every kind of internet use, but it's very powerful. It's been very successful for journalists or other people trying to protect their identity while they're online. But they need more people to run. They need more of these nodes, and specifically they need just random people to run the nodes. They don't want like very paranoid people running the nodes, or they don't want only governments running the nodes, or only certain kinds of people. They want everyone to be a participant. So if you have a router and you have a couple spare megabits of connectivity and a few CPU cycles, you can throw in and help. And you can use the network for all kinds of things. You can host services anonymously called hidden services that are only accessible once you're already within the Tor network. And so one thing I find interesting, there's lots of libraries. People post their own personal libraries of like erotica or like drug books or like all these great things, and it's really interesting to see like normally, like if I was going to share my library, I would maybe censor it a little bit or like take some books out. I don't want everyone to see all the books that I have, but people just put it all out there in these huge, really carefully curated collections, or like books that have been censored, articles that have been censored, all kinds of content is available. It's kind of like the old internet. So maybe you don't want to browse that unfiltered all the time, but it's interesting to dip the spoon in and see what people are posting. And another use for this network, especially here in Europe, is there's increasingly laws against sharing your home wireless internet connection. So if someone takes an action on your home connection, like if they hack into a website, or if they pirate some media, or if they even just post a bad comment online, if it gets traced back to you and they can't trace it back to the person who did the act, you end up responsible legally because you're providing access, even if you just have an open access point with no password. So this is like a little bit of a dilemma. And one possible solution to it is for you to provide open access on your local router, but to route all of the traffic through Tor. So even though like there's no way anyone can connect to your router and they can get anywhere they want on the internet, but there's no way to trace back the fact that, like if they go and make a nasty edit on Wikipedia, Wikipedia has no way to trace that back to you or the user. So it kind of absolves you of responsibility in that way. And open wireless is, I think, like super important for society to have, to be able to walk around and check your email anywhere you go, or if your phone breaks or something, being able to get access without having to pay into a network is like a huge social good. So I have set up here another router on the openwireless.org SSID. So if you connect to that, all of your traffic goes through the Tor network, which is a little slow, especially at first. So I just switched to that, and we can try refreshing this page. That was pretty fast. And an interesting tool if you're using Tor, first to make sure that you're using Tor, you can go to this website, check.torproject, which will try to determine if you're coming in through the network or not. So if you went to this page, not from the open wireless access point, it probably wouldn't say you're connected to Tor. And you can see where you're coming out of the network. So you can find the location of your exit node, which today is coming out of Russia, some random location in the middle of Russia, and it looks anonymous. Yeah, very possibly. All right, that's what I've got to show for now. Does anyone have questions? Microphone? I can repeat questions.
Hello. I would like to ask you, I have a router and I flashed it with DD VRT, and you're using Open VRT. I also know there's another firmware, Tomato, just barely. So I was wondering why are you using Open VRT? Just because I'm just curious, because sometimes I read on the forums that the one that I'm using, DD VRT, is not very. The guys who make it don't really understand security too much, but I like it, so yeah. I just want to. Yeah.
So there's a lot of these different router firmwares, and most of them are designed to run on very limited devices that have very limited memory, so they're specific. So it's a little weird, actually, that I'm using OpenWRT for this, because the device is much more powerful. I like OpenWRT better than DDWRT because it just seems to be developed more in the open, like people are more transparent about it. All the source code is very easy to get. It's very easy to rebuild the whole system or port it to new hardware. But there's like the Tomato firmware is very popular. It has a much slicker user interface. So I used OpenWRT as the base, but it's actually running Debian. Most of the things run in a virtual machine on the device, so you can spool up. So like the Calibra instance has its own virtual machine that it's running within. So it's if you're like a developer or a system administrator, it's very easy to set a service up. Anything that you could set up, probably on Ubuntu or on Debian, you can just create a new virtual machine and start up the service within it. But I like OpenWRT because the build process for generating my own images is very fast.
Hi, I have a question. And if you do a hardware hack and set up a node, do you lose any bandwidth speed because it has to go through all the nodes? Specifically, if you have a 50 megabyte or a something faster, would you lose any actual speed in loading data from a website that you're pulling data from?
Are you asking about Tor?
I'm asking if you do that, and if you do the whole charade, does that affect your system?
Yeah, massively. It's like a huge slowdown. It's not very convenient unless you're like looking to connect to a specific website or like, and they specifically don't want people to run BitTorrent or downloading video, even if it's like, it's totally free stuff to be given away. It's just bad for because it uses so much more network traffic, but it's really useful for connecting. For instance, if you just need a little piece of information, like how to connect to someone else's computer, but you only know how to get to it through Tor, it gives you that little piece of information pretty quickly because it's not much data, and then you can use a different method. And Tor is definitely not the answer. Like it's not what everyone should use for browsing all the time, but I think it's a great example of like a specific kind of network that if you have extra infrastructure, you can run all these different kinds of networks. There's all kinds of different ways to make dark nets or tunnel through to different ways that might have better network performance, but you need a dedicated device to be doing it.
I have a question. So, yeah, I know that that hackers are providing these, and you are one of them, providing these kind of devices. But then most of the time the problem is that it's not accessible. It's quite hard to run it if you are not a hacker, like most of the time. And then I'm interested in is there any way, is there any plan or whatever, so that if people trust you, if you're like become like a trustee, for them. So is there any way that you just like bring a router and then you can actually remotely set it up if I trust you, and then I can just replace my router? Because I think that there is one moment when you're replacing routers where you can just shut down your network and then like call your hacker neighbor to fix the mess which you just did. That's the one thing. And another one is that I know that there is enough of support from like a cultural, political field. So people want to support the autonomous networks, but it's about the price. So my question is like, I know that you are working on a router in like trying to get the price down, and that you wanna like really like deliver it like almost like a Apple kind of a product. So what's the price range now, and what are your like predictions of people who just want to pay and then like run it? So what would be the price of the router today or like in a year or something?
Well, the first thing was like it might be too difficult to use, and I think that's just because these technologies aren't finished yet. Like if it was easy to use, you wouldn't even think of it as a technology. It would just be part of your life. So like all these things that are still in a rough state are just not. I don't think there's anything inherently difficult about it. It's just not complete enough or polished enough. Like how much things cost, which is very important for accessibility, or if you want to. Like if you want people to just try it or experiment with it, it needs to be cheap, or to be able to give it as a gift to someone you know and set it up for them. I hope to get them cheap. Like you can buy a router for $30 or $40 or euros today, and I hope in 3 or 4 years a router would be just as cheap, or even that the routers that you can buy at a market will be powerful enough to run the router software on it. Right now, like the device I have is costs like 280 euros or something. Which is like quite a lot to ask someone to set up on their own. But I'm working to get like below 80 euros or so for the first generation device.
I had a question, a specific one. Is there any like a project which because I can see that whole setup. So I'm buying a router and I have a router which works for me. So is there any way or project which addresses that moment? So I don't want to deal with that. I will like pay whatever, $50, $100, and I want to support it. Is there any way that I put it in my local area network and then someone can set it up?
Not from your local area network?
Sorry?
Not from your, like someone on your local area network?
No. I buy a router and I'm on internet and I put that router inside of my local area network, but it's still not like it cannot like serve me because I need to reconfigure it or whatever. Is there any project which address that problem? So I trust you and I will let you to configure it. Maybe I will pay you, or you will just do that voluntarily because you want to support the network. Is there any project which addresses that kind of problem?
I don't know
in that way?
Addresses that specific problem.
Okay.
But certainly, like if you could use you could grant access and someone could try to log in remotely, as long as it by default connects and is open. Then you could give someone the information needed to log in and they could reconfigure it remotely. But I haven't thought all that through, I guess. Any more? All right, I think there's lightning talks. No.
Okay, thank you, Bryan.